Joining me now are Duncan Levin, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, and Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor who served for over a decade in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. Thank you for both for being here. I was flabbergasted. Christy, I believe you were down there today, but I was, she says with a resigned fashion. I was flabbergasted that they would really entreat Stormy Daniels to revisit the sort of sleazy moments in the hotel and then say, but we need a mistrial because this information has been too prejudicial.
Right, the hypocrisy of it.
Yes.
I mean, and you know, this is what Judge Merchan was saying when he denied that mistrial motion of, hey, in your defense, you opened the door. You said she was a liar, and you said this never happened. And yet, then they go into questioning, and the state says, well, okay, now we have to go into details because that lends her story credibility. And then on cross, rather than, maybe stay away from that to kind of preserve this issue from appeal in saying maybe this is too prejudicial, instead they dove right in.
Yeah.
And they were getting into it. And again, if your argument is it never happened, I'm not sure why they were pointing out so many details about whether in this situation she would have consented or not. Like, it made no sense. It was not really driving to a point that there were inconsistencies. The only inconsistency they kept pointing to was, it felt like forever about whether or not he fed her dinner.
Yes, I want to, and I do want to get to some of the belabored point, and there were a number of very belabored moments in this trial today. But the hypocrisy, even to the casual observer, seemed remarkable. I wonder, though, as we sort of like joke about the hypocrisy, or not joke about it, but highlight it, how much of a threat a mistrial really is. I mean, the fact that Karen McDougal is not testifying, Duncan, do you see that as evidence that the prosecution is hesitant to get into more sexual allegations vis-a-vis Donald Trump as potential grounds for calling, again, for a mistrial?
Well, I think the judge really called it out because he said, I've been objecting to this testimony as it's been coming in myself in order to give Trump a fair trial. And I shouldn't have to do that. You're not doing your job. You have let all this stuff. And there was stuff that came in, much like Donald Trump is an uncontrollable client, Stormy Daniels was an uncontrollable witness for the DA's office. She was offering so much that at some point the judge said, why don't you go talk to Ms. Daniels and have her just answer the question that's being posed. And so he said, I've been objecting to things myself. You've let all of this in. There were some details about Mr. Trump having sex without a condom, things that should not have come into that trial.
Thank you for repeating that, Duncan.
Well, I know it's a family show.
Yeah.
But that stuff does not need to come in to this trial. It is prejudicial. And the fact is that if Mr. Trump is convicted, you can guarantee that this is going to be part of his appeal. He's going to say, I had ineffective assistance of counsel. They didn't do anything while she was getting all of this in front of the jury. This is going to be the basis for his appeal.
Yeah, well, and the judge pointed it out again today, kind of like, hey, defense, do your job, object to more things. I'm basically playing your role. Is that the strategy to get this thrown out on appeal?
But you have to object in order to preserve the issue for appeal. So there is no strategy to not objecting. They needed to object. They didn't do it. They were sitting on their hands. But then the strategy was on cross to actually go into all these details to kind of dirty her up and say, you just shouldn't believe anything she says because she's a porn star. And a porn star in this situation, being in a hotel room with Donald Trump, couldn't feel uncomfortable, couldn't feel awkward. Right?
Because she was a porn star.
Have those feelings because she's a porn star. And just going back to the jury, this is a jury that is a Manhattan jury, a very highly educated jury. Their jobs are mostly, I think most of them are college educated. They have jobs in finance, in law, in engineering. This is not a jury, and they're split. There's seven men, 5 women, split between married and single. But you have to figure, this is not necessarily the jury where that is going to play, and it was just the tone. She was not only, when Susan Neckles was doing the questioning, it was not only that the words were insulting, and they were, but it was this kind of mocking tone that she used. And it was just, it was really offensive to listen to, and it was unnecessary. And I feel like, again, that was my feeling sitting there, but I have to think that a Manhattan jury that's that makeup would feel that way too.
Yeah, how much their strategy was to shame Stormy Daniels for her career and suggest that she couldn't possibly, there's no way she could have been traumatized, I guess is the word, or caught off guard by Donald Trump sitting there in his boxer shorts. Do you think it all made her a more sympathetic witness?
100%. And remember that at the end of the day, it really solidified what came out on the direct examination, which is that Trump was almost like a predator. You know, there's this testimony in direct examination that he's sitting there in his hotel suite in his silk pajamas, almost like he's Hugh Hefner. Her hands are shaking as she's putting on her gold heel shoes after their sexual encounter. That was very credible, real stuff that portrayed him in a terrible light, and their cross-examination today almost solidified it as the attack dogs going after this woman who's been in this situation. And Stormy Daniels, remember, is a witness that the DA's office did not need to call.
Right.
They took a risk, and I think tonight they're celebrating the risk that they took in calling her. But they didn't really need to call her because arguably they've already, at this point in the trial, established the elements of the crime. They've established the false business records. They've established the intent to defraud the voters. They've established the intent to conceal this conspiracy between David Pecker and the National Enquirer and Michael Cohen and Donald Trump. They've established all of this. And so the reason they called her is that it gives voice to this horrific story that Trump was so desperate not to come out. Right on the heels of that Access Hollywood tape, he found out, the Trump campaign found out that these two women, Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, were about to sell this story.
Yeah.
Well, the jury got to hear this week what that story was, and it was terrible. And now they viscerally can see what this story is. And that's why they called her. But it was a risk because she's a witness who has baggage. She is subject to this kind of cross-examination. I think the defense took the bait, fell right into the trap, and really just made themselves look terrible, and they bolstered her credibility.
Well, and they went after her on these details, which you alluded to earlier, Christy, about whether or not she ate dinner with Donald Trump in his hotel room, whether or not she took a car to the hotel. I mean, I guess the idea was to poke holes in her recollection, but these were such small details that seem so meaningless compared to the broader narrative she was telling. I mean, what did you make of those exchanges?
First, I didn't feel like they actually pointed to any inconsistencies. The way that she described it was, yeah, I said I met with him at dinner time. I never said we ate anything. I was starving. And these were shorter interviews, and she didn't tell every detail in the interviews that she had. And they didn't point to anything where she had really said something that was contradictory. That was one. And then two, as you said, these are small details, and this happened 20 years ago. So you expect witnesses, and I mean, Duncan, I'm sure you've seen it, like we've both seen when you meet with witnesses, sometimes recollections fade as to things that are, you know, not the key details. But on the key details, she has been consistent. So, again, this was really not effective. And the other thing is, again, they opened the door by calling her a liar in the opening. And so when you do that, yeah, then the jury would want to hear from her about what happened. And so her going through the story, again, that was a defense tactical error. But do I think that will lead to a mistrial or an appellate issue? Not necessarily. I mean, these are retained lawyers. These are very good lawyers with strong reputations. I don't think it will get that far, but they have definitely been sitting on their hands and not making very good strategic decisions during this trial.
I got to talk about not good strategic decisions. Today, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth on this gag order. Trump's team asked Judge Merchan to amend the gag order to allow the president to respond to Stormy Daniels. Merchan said no. Earlier, a few hours ago, Stormy Daniels tweeted, "Real men respond to testimony by being sworn in and taking the stand in court. Oh, wait, never mind." Is that what's Duncan?
I think, look, there's a problem in the fact that the witnesses are not subject to this gag order. And we've been seeing tweets from Michael Cohen attacking Mr. Trump as well. And so I think there is a bit of a disconnect between the fact that he can't say anything and that the witnesses can. But that being said, there is a long history here of Mr. Trump inciting violence against not only the witnesses, but the DA's office, the members of the DA's office staff, the judge, the family. There is a real background here. There's a reason that this gag order exists. And I think that at the end of the day, he's right not to modify the gag order because there are more witnesses coming. And if you lift the gag order right now, these witnesses who are coming up are going to know that right the minute they're off the stand, they're going to be subject to all these attacks. It cannot stand, given the history of these violent attacks on people. And I think the judge is right to just keep it in place and keep it as it is.
Well, but maybe Stormy Daniels don't poke the bear on Twitter. Just a layperson's advice there.